Luke 10:38-42. As they traveled, Jesus entered a village where a woman named Martha welcomed him to her home. She had a sister named Mary who had seated herself at Jesus' feet and listened to his words. Martha, who was busy with all the details of hospitality, came to Jesus and said, "Rabbi, don't you care that my sister has left me all alone to do the household task? Tell her to help me." Jesus replied, "Martha, Martha, you're anxious and upset about so many things, but only a few things are necessary, really only one. Mary has chosen the better part, and she won't be deprived of it." La palabra de Dios. Gracias a Dios.
Let's pray together. Gracious God, thank you for today. Thank you for the warmth of this space, both the warmth of the hearts and the warmth of this world that you've created for us to inhabit and live and enjoy each other. God, help us to learn how to love one another completely and confidently and with graciousness. Lord, take our minds and think through them. Take our mouths and speak through them, and take our hearts and set them on fire. Amen. First of all, I had a rough beginning to the day. I forgot my card that activates the computer. So this is a government-issued computer, courtesy of the VA, and you need that card. And so I got here, what I thought was going to be nice and early, and it was about 10:40. I was, kind of leisurely getting things set up, and then I go to turn on my computer, and I remembered, oh, my card! Oh, shoot, it's still at home. So I had to run home and get back. So I'm arriving as we speak, and so thank you for allowing me to arrive with you. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Dick. Thanks for the welcome. So part of that prayer for me is an opportunity to ground myself in addition to everybody else. So when we read today's gospel lesson, we may be thinking to ourselves, what did Martha do wrong? What did Martha do wrong? Did she do something wrong? Isn't Jesus worth waiting on? Aren't we called to be faithful servants? What's happening here? And it may seem to us that Mary's the one that's slacking off, right? You ever been in the situation at school or work where you're working on a group project together and you're chugging along, your things are going great, you both seem to be sharing the load and getting things done. And soon enough, however, your partner is off talking to their friends, and you have been involuntarily stuck with doing all the work. It burns us up inside, right? We think to ourselves in a passively jealous rage, how come I'm the one doing all the work and they have all the fun? Of course, I'd love to believe that I was never the one slacking off in those situations. From Martha's perspective, we may read this story that way. Here's Jesus, our friend, healer, teacher of the region, spending time in our house, and there's a lot of work to do. Because he just kind of popped in, right? He just showed up. There wasn't time to prepare. So Martha does what many of us would have done. She's cleaning, dusting, making coffee, getting snacks, all while her sister just sat down and talked to Jesus, not sharing in any of the work. When Martha complains about it, we expect Jesus to at least praise her, right, in her attempt to tidy the house up a little bit, if not insist on helping her. But instead, he says something like this, Martha, Martha, you're distracted too easily. Mary knows what's really important, talking to me. And that won't be taken away from her. So what's the lesson to be learned from this? Not to fuss over our house guests. Why do now what you can put off until tomorrow? Jesus doesn't like it when we do our chores. I would have loved that interpretation as a kid. Of course, I don't think any of those is really what Jesus meant in his declaration to Martha. And this is, of course, my interpretation. You can do whatever you want with this. We'll have time for one-to-ones after this where you can talk about that. In fact, no one really believes that those are the possible interpretations, but it's fun to pretend, isn't it? Especially on a face value reading of this. I found two helpful ways of looking at this passage. One is to do with distraction. Not so much about with what we are distracting ourselves, but from whom we are distracting ourselves. The second is that the author is giving us permission to love the way that we love. I don't like to say things like this. We're too busy, and so we need to spend more time doing things God likes. The end. To make something so abstract like that is almost more useless than not saying anything at all, because it really isn't helpful. So we're going to get real concrete here. I was going to tell a story about something that happened to me a long time ago, but I'm going to actually tell the story about what happened today. So, as I said earlier, I was on my way here and had forgotten something very important for the function of this computer. I ran home to get it, and before that, though, I stopped at the store to pick up our snack supplies for our amazing party earlier. And I was kind of in a rush then, just to get here when I got here. So I ran into the store and I ran out. And if you go to the New Seasons here, there's almost always somebody out in front, right? There's usually somebody selling a street roots or somebody looking for some help of some sort. And at the very least, I try to like make eye contact and say hello or just acknowledge humanity in some way. But today that didn't happen. Today I just had the blinders on, had to get the things and go in and go out, right? And it got me thinking, because I come here every Sunday or whenever I can, and last Sunday we were talking about the Good Samaritan. I think Matt was talking about the Good Samaritan with the kids, and John was delivering the message on the Good Samaritan, and I had that story in mind as I was doing the very thing that the priest in the story was doing. Just had the blinder. I had something to do, right? I had something to do for the function of the church that required me to just walk on past without even acknowledging. I told myself I wasn't even busy. I was too busy to acknowledge, even. And there's nothing wrong with me that is the case. I just noticed it. I just noticed this is how that story gets lived out every single day. People become invisible so easily in our lives. Distracted by what we perceive to be God's work, which this is God's work. Gathering our community together is God's work. But we get distracted sometimes from the reality of what our work is out in the real world by doing this work. Not that this work is bad. I'm not pitting one against the other. I'm just noticing. I noticed it in me today. We're called to at least recognize one another's humanity. At the very least. So how does all of this relate to Jesus' story here? Martha, Martha, here I am now. Here I am now. Slow down. Here I am. Let's develop a relationship. Acknowledge my humanity. In your serving me, don't forget that. Don't forget why you're doing what you're doing. In this story, Jesus isn't the Samaritan, but he's the Jewish person on the side of the road that we are called to pay attention to. And if sitting down and being present is your thing, then sit down and be present. If providing a space and serving food is your thing, then do it. But no one be resentful of the other for loving the way that they love. What if Jesus was giving Martha permission to just love him the way that she loves him, and let Mary love him the way that Mary loves him? What if that was the better way that Jesus was talking about? Not simply that Mary was sitting at Jesus' feet and that is somehow inherently better than doing the work in the kitchen, but that Mary was completely immersed in her way of loving. I don't think Jesus is telling Martha to stay in her lane, but as someone who can get pretty defensive of Martha and her vision of hospitality, I forget that her character is actually poo-pooing Mary's loving presence. But Martha, love the way that you love. You have a gift that you want to share it. Share it lovingly. Don't poo-poo someone else's loving ways. Is that the first time that poo-poo has ever been used in this sanctuary? I used it twice. Doesn't it sound all too familiar that someone would tell another that their way of loving someone was incorrect, and that they should adapt their ways? I think that is what has become so valuable about Gary Chapman's conception of the 5 love languages, where he describes that each of us has a specific way in which we give and receive love. And he names them as this: gift giving. So actually giving gifts, being mindful of someone else as you're going about your day and picking out a gift and giving it to them. Some people, you can think of those people in your minds, right? They just show up with something like, I was thinking about you. Here's something that made me think about you, and I thought you'd love it. Right? There's just people that are naturally good at that. There's quality time, spending time with people, just sitting down and being present to them. Words of affirmation, encouragement, words that when you hear them, you're like, oh gosh, that person really sees me and loves me in their words. Acts of service, doing chores for someone, there's a need in the community, and this person's the first person to step up and say, hey, I can do that. I got time. I got a truck. I can do it. I'll show up. And then physical touch, just the act of hugging, embracing, massage, those kinds of acts. So while I may naturally express my love to others with words of encouragement, what you may need from me is a quick hug, because your language of receiving love is physical touch. And it's going to be harder for you to understand my words to you as loving, and I come away feeling annoyed that my action, born out of care for you, was not received as a loving gesture as it was intended. Does that make sense? Let's say my love language is words of encouragement, and your way of receiving love is primarily through physical touch. It's going to be harder for you to notice that there's loving intention in those words. So clearly in the story, Martha is an acts of service kind of lady. And Mary is demonstrating some quality time loving tendencies. And Martha wasn't choosing her own action as an act of loving service. Notice that Mary didn't complain, "Lord, don't you care that my sisters left me to hold the weight of this conversation by myself? Jeez. Need some help here. Jesus is awkward to talk to." No. Perhaps the implied added words, "for her," are to be inserted in Jesus' admonition to Martha. Mary has chosen what is better for her, and it will not be taken away from her. What love language is Martha choosing for her that will benefit those in her community? In this moment, Martha was clearly not aware of or confident that what she offered was a valued and loving contribution, and then became dismissive of Mary's own contribution. It seems to me that it is all valuable. All acts of love are needed right now to help bring God's kingdom into fruition, which requires both self-awareness in our own abilities and natural inclinations, and awareness of the other and how our love responses are received by others. I've always appreciated, for example, when people ask, "Can I give you a hug?" They don't just go in, right? "Can I give you a hug?" Because there's no assumption there that I want a hug or need a hug. Or maybe that's not something that feels safe to me. Not assuming that their act of love is welcomed as a gesture by someone else. That's what they're doing. All 5 love languages done without consideration of how they're received by the other can actually be kind of hurtful, maybe quite hurtful. Physical touch can be abusive. Words of encouragement can be dismissive. Acts of service can be patronizing. Quality time can be oppressive. Gift giving can be manipulative. But instead, I want to exhibit a universal loving awareness of the other's experience in my loving them, just as I would want others to be aware of my experience of their loving me. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay, so we're going to, in our time together today, we're going to conclude with some one-to-ones. And again, this is an invitation. This is not a mandatory action. If you're an introverted person or just need some space today, you don't have to find another person to have the one-to-one. We've got stations over here and up front for prayer. If you'd like to pray by yourself or just sit in your seat by yourself, that's fine too. But I encourage you, if you're kind of like on the fence about it, to maybe nudge yourself over into the one-to-one zone and think about the love languages that are happening in your life, how they occur to you. So for you, what way of loving comes most readily to you? So if you remember, I'll share what those were again. Gift giving, quality time, words of affirmation, acts of service, and physical touch. So before we break up, just think about those for a second. Think about what of those fits you and how you give love and what love feels like to you when you receive it. Gift giving, quality time, words of affirmation, acts of service, and physical touch. We're going to spend some time now talking about our love languages, how you receive love and how you give love. And then also, how do you see your act of loving as an important piece of what the world needs now? So how do you receive? How do you give? And how does that fit into the bigger picture of of what the world needs right now. Okay?